My name is Joe Greenholtz, Dr. Joe. I've been involved in immigration since 1990 when I joined the Foreign Service. I think Canada is sufficiently desirable that there will.
Do you think Canada is on its track to of the goal of welcoming 500,000 newcomers annually? What do you think is going to be how much of a difference in this number is going to be?
It's not a question of can we reach this target, and that's when court challenges will begin. There is effectively no government.
Do you think Canada's immigration goals are realistic given these policy changes? And there are people who have questions in mind. What should I apply as? What is the best way to get into Canada and immigrate to Canada? So what would you suggest?
I think CEC would be the most.
So what's your take on the provincial nominee programs?
So what's going to happen in the PNP is that
How are they positioned in terms of the whole grand scheme of things?
one of the changes was I think IRCC has bigger allocations for Ontario, BC.
If you were to make reforms, what are the most important reforms do you think can be made right now?
We need a serious immigration minister.
Hello and welcome to Imi Perch. Dr. Joe, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for inviting me. So it's a real honor to be here.
The honor is ours to have you here because I know you have extensive experience in the immigration space, and I'm sure our listeners are going to learn so much from you. So let's quickly, I would just want you to speak to us and tell us a little bit about your experience and what have you been doing. I know you speak on a lot of platforms, but then from IMIPERS, let the viewers know about you.
Okay. My name is Joe Greenholtz. I'm known by my clients as Dr. Joe. That's because of a doctorate in education. I'm not a medical doctor, but I earned the PhD, so I thought I would use it. I've been involved in immigration since 1990 when I joined the Foreign Service in the immigration stream. I spent a couple of years training in Ottawa, and that was really valuable. I mean, obviously, to be an immigration officer, it was valuable, but it was also very valuable because I learned how to read the legislation.
Well,
And that's not something that comes naturally. And so I think I have a leg up when somebody asks me a question. I don't do a Google search for the general information out there. I go to the legislation or the regulations or the ministerial instructions and find out, what the actual process is. And it's something that I incorporate into every file. Always go back to the legislation because there's nothing that supersedes it. I was in the Foreign Service only for 5 years, and for personal reasons having to do with one of my kids, we decided it would be better to come back to Canada than to bounce around from post to post. Educational opportunities vary depending on where you go. And so we came back to Canada, and for 11 years I was at UBC with an exchange program with a Japanese university. And I did stay involved in immigration because was able to arrange work permits for our students when they came so that they could volunteer and have various experiences in the community. So I kept my hand in immigration. And then when I left UBC, my wife suggested that instead of lying around on the couch, that I might make use of my prior immigration experience. So I took the consultant's course at UBC, and in 2010 I was licensed, and I've been working as a consultant since then.
wow, that's quite a journey.
It is. I mean, it when you look back at life, it seems like you move smoothly from point to point, but really you're just bouncing around when opportunities present themselves. And I think it worked out all in all. I've had an interesting career so far.
Awesome. That's a great to know. So I know in the Canadian immigration space, in the last I would say few months, have been rocky from a lot of perspective. So what do you think about the changes that are coming in the immigration space, and how is it going to impact the popularity of Canada as a number one immigration a country among the immigrants?
Well, I think it's going to have profound effect on the people who qualify and perhaps people who came with aspirations to stay permanently, who've seen the game change under their feet and probably are not any longer in a strong position, to become permanent residents. I mean, overall, I think Canada is sufficiently desirable that there will always be people seeking to come. But I think the recent changes were born really out of political panic. They're not well thought out from a policy point of view. They are, taking a sledgehammer to kill a fly, completely gutting the LMIA process for all intents and purposes, and making it much more difficult to be selected, killing flag polling without defining flag polling. I think there's probably going to be a legal challenge to that somewhere down the road. So politicians panicked. Immigrants and international students, temporary workers, have been blamed for the housing shortage, for inflation. It may be true. I mean, in the past, absentee landlords were blamed for rising housing prices. And then after that, it was Airbnb and, people opting for short-term rental instead of adding to that. I mean, all kinds of things have been blamed for housing price increases and inflation. Again, it may be true, but I don't see any data. No one has linked, except in the public's mind, these two processes. I think politicians panicked and thought, we've got to dampen this down, otherwise there'll be a revolt against immigration. And that would be a tragedy, because the multicultural nature of Canada, it's one of the, I think, rare success stories in terms of integration of newcomers into a society. I'm not saying that there aren't systemic prejudices built into Canadian society. My wife is now an elderly Japanese woman, and she feels a difference in how professionals relate to her. So she feels there's something out there. But by and large, I think we've integrated very, very successfully. I mean, you would know better than I. And for those reasons, I think Canadian immigration will survive these badly thought out short-term measures, hope to short-term.
All right. Do you think Canada is on its track to of the goal of welcoming 500,000 newcomers annually? Because that was previously what Canada was aiming at. So with newer policies, I think Canada wouldn't be able to, attain this target, and they're differing for sure. So what do you think is going to be like with the new changes? How much of a difference in this number is going to be like?
Well, I mean, the number has already officially been reduced to 395,000. Frankly, it's not a question of can we reach this target. We could easily reach 500,000, but it's not deemed politically expedient to continue to raise the number of PRs that are accepted every year. And so, if it was only a year ago that the targets were released, 500,000 this year, next year, then increasing the year after that, I think that's evidence of how reactive and badly thought out the measures that government has put in recently are. Just a year ago, we were, international students, more PRs, and now, oops, too many PRs, too many students, and just a reaction to the political situation, not good policy.
Mm-hmm. But then
overall, as I say, 500,000, 600,000, if IRCC had the capacity, another suspect, badly thought out move, I think, is to reduce the number of full-time positions in.
I was about to come to that question. So I think people are going to be laid off.
And that's going to make it, that much more difficult to achieve any target. I think that IRCC is betting on AI to speed things up. Okay. And there will come a time when they cross the line, probably without telling anyone, and AI will start making decisions on cases. And that's when court challenges will begin, and they will have to rethink that strategy. With the reductions and processing times way beyond their stated processing standards, I don't see any way out of it except to rely on non-human decision making, which AI, I don't think is capable.
Mm-hmm. So that's a new thing that I have come across to know, that with the reduction in the number of employees, basically an AI system is being implemented. I think, AI is going to make a lot of changes, but I think personal life stories and humans, we are talking about human lives here, who are taking a bet on setting up their lives in some other country. I think they need more personal, evaluation than the AI at the moment, probably.
At least a human being to make the final decision. I mean, if AI is used to triage files, then it basically becomes profiling. Mm-hmm. I mean, what else does it have to rely on except a set of parameters? So, young single male from country X is likely to be sort of eliminated a priori without an actual look at the case.
Sure.
That's a danger that we face. Immigration has shifted. My last program manager in Tokyo, he started as a young officer in one of the 10 or so offices that we had across the UK. And, in his day, a person could walk into his office and he'd say, "I like the cut of your jib. Welcome to Canada." Just like that. Wow. Like total discretion. And then with express entry, first with the point system, then with the express entry, they tried to wring the subjectivity out of the system. And I think AI is going a little too far in taking, all subjectivity out of the system. There is a role for officer decision-making and officer discretion. It would be a mistake to abandon that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. I think, I agree with you on that. I hope better sense prevails and we have more sensible decision-making. Yes.
Not in the short term. I mean, there is effectively no government right now. It's been prorogued, and the Liberals are off on a leadership race, and Pierre Poilievre's been campaigning for the last 2 years. So, I mean, it's not that the department can't continue to make policy, but they're not getting guidance. Except for the slash and burn kind of approach that's been adopted out of panic. So I think we'll see a bit of chaos in the immigration system. There'll be an election, and no matter who wins the election, it takes time to get up and running, to come up with well thought out policies that the department is directed to implement. It's not going to be pretty for at least the next year, I don't think.
Right. Right. And with these economic uncertainties globally, do you think Canada's immigration goals are realistic given these policy changes? Do you think these goals are at all realistic at the moment, whatever they have?
Yeah, as I said earlier, Canada, I think, could accept as many people as it's capable of processing. The population that will get hit the most is people who are overseas. I mean, the immigration system is now shifting heavily towards in Canada applicants. Express entry, the federal highly skilled category, which frankly I hadn't heard of until I started doing research for this podcast, has now been bifurcated into the in Canada focus, which is heavily CIC, but also FSW candidates in Canada. Caregivers have now been finally, brought into the fold where they, among all others, were the only ones to arrive in Canada without PR and then have to do first a 2-year, then a 1-year, now a 6-month sort of apprenticeship. And now finally, they're being regularized. There are backlogs galore. They haven't accepted a parent-grandparent application since 2020. I mean, filling the numbers is not a problem, I don't think. Fewer people will be coming in from overseas. It'll be kind of like COVID. During COVID, IRCC sort of relied exclusively on people who are already in Canada because that removed the complications of international travel and what have you.
Right. So I know express entry has been there for 10 years now. It has served its purpose for a long time, I think, in filling in the gap of this specific skills. So how do you think at the moment express entry is in further also moving forward, going to fill in the gap of specific job roles which are there in the market and that is in deficit? How is it sitting well right now? And is it relevant given the situation right now in the market?
Well, the government has expressed its faith in express entry by upping the total proportion or portion of PRs from 110,000 to 124,000 just in express entry. And of those, 120,000 are slated for the in Canada focus and the special categories. Most analysts see a trend towards increased emphasis on healthcare, trades, and francophones within express entry. So rather than having the 5 or 6 categories that have been sort of drawn helter-skelter, there will be a greater emphasis, I think, on those 3 specialist categories. I mean, IRCC has always thought that they could, regulate the macroeconomy by, turning on this tap, turning off that tap. But, it takes years for those changes to work through the system. It's not really an effective strategy. They don't seem to learn from experience as far as that goes. But this is where they're going now. So healthcare, trades, francophones, and people in Canada. So CEC will benefit massively. And then working through the various backlogs.
Right. So there are people who are going to listen to this podcast. There are people who are going to come to IMIPER's platform and look at And there are people who have questions in mind. What should I apply as? What is the best way to get into Canada and immigrate to Canada? So if you're suggesting somebody, okay, these are the right ways you should try and these are the things that you should do, what would you suggest to those people who are wanting to immigrate?
Um, I think CEC would be the most attractive route. But I mean, for most people, it's not a one-step process, particularly if Canadian skilled work experience is going to be the, make or break defining factor. Now, it used to be that, international students were the golden children of the immigration system. The minister spoke in glowing terms about how these are people who have Canadian education and could get Canadian work experience through the postgraduate work permit and then integrate seamlessly into the Canadian labor economy. They've sort of chopped the legs out from under the first step by capping international students, making the PGWP, if not more difficult, at least sort of less attractive, because now spouses won't be able to get open work permits unless the principal applicant was in a master's program or selected areas of education, probably STEM and tech and what have you. And so on the one hand, they are making it much more difficult for students to make that transition into the Canadian workforce, et cetera. But on the other hand, they're boosting the profile of CEC. So the gap is how are people going to get Canadian work experience? LMIAs, as I say, they've gutted them. The dual purpose LMIA has been eliminated for all intents and purposes. The 10% cap on low wage, which is now up to $36 an hour, is considered low wage, regardless of the local labor conditions. That's again taking a sledgehammer to the problem. And the transition plans now being not only required for all high-skilled applications, but being the basis for a performance review the next time an employer applies for an LMIA. I mean, I'm out in BC and I work fairly extensively with employers in Whistler, for example. They need low-skilled help. That's the local labor market. They're not paying $36 an hour, for somebody to work in a bar or in hospitality or at a hotel desk. And so how are those businesses going to continue to staff and operate? To say, hire locally, it's absurd. They're just not there. And to just wave your hand and make it impossible for those employers to effectively recruit people, where's the sense in that? Who benefits from that? The politicians who say they're cracking down on, temporary foreign workers. Employers will suffer. Those employees will suffer. A low-wage LMIA is now good for only a year. I've had cases that I submitted in May that are still waiting to be assigned to an officer. So if an LMIA is going to take a year to process, then employers are just going to be on a hamster wheel of continuous LMIA applications. There's no sense in the system. So how are they going to bridge the gap from coming to Canada to accumulating the kind of Canadian experience that's going to give them a heads up? I think that's going to be a bottleneck or a disruptor sort of in the flow that the international students were chosen to fill and were, doing quite nicely with. Mind you, I mean, I don't know if you want me to talk about the international student situation.
Well, you can.
Can I?
Yes, absolutely.
I think every system encounters entropy where, something is working well and then it starts to slowly spin down until the wheels come off. And so in the international student world, I mean, as you mentioned in our pre-recording chat, um, all kinds of unscrupulous, agents and people who call themselves consultants, both overseas and unfortunately in Canada, sell a lot of international students a bill of goods. I cannot put the blame entirely on the marketers, the agents and the non-consultants, because you really need the willing cooperation of the would-be student. Um, I'd be hard-pressed to believe that the majority of students come expecting one thing and then experience a bait and switch. I think part of the sales process is, you'll be able to work, and then they say, oh, wow, that sounds pretty good. I'll sign up for that. But, it's not the way the system is structured. In the paper the other day, it said there are 50,000 students who never showed up to school at all. So
Right.
they are willing participants, right, in the scheme. And the post-secondary institutions that are starving for funds, I mean, franchising their diploma and degree programs to strip mall, fly-by-night private colleges, all of these things have led to the decline, and I'm afraid at least the partial, if not complete, destruction of the whole successful international student mechanism. There are a lot of players who are looking, for benefits or an edge that eventually corrupt the system. And it's always true of investor categories. Starts out great, and then people start selling this, and if you do this, I can get you an edge, and then it becomes a scam. And that's why there are very few, investors in the pipeline anymore. It was just too much corruption in the system. It's kind of a sour note. I'm sorry about that, but that's how I perceive
I
things.
think we have to show the real side, because I believe I absolutely concur with you on this. But there are a lot of stakeholders. If something collapses, it's not just the government; it's also the people who were part of it. People thought, okay, this situation is I'm going to Canada, I'm going to work, I'm going to earn the money, then invest in the college. And okay, somebody said, okay, these are just private colleges. You give less hours, work more hours. It's going to help out. And I think it all came down to the collapse of the system. It actually didn't work out for anyone at the end of the day.
No, and I I think it's unconscionable, really, for someone to promote and enlist students to come to Canada to go to a private college, for example. They're not PGWP eligible. It's clearly a dead end. Okay, you can work 20 or 24 hours a week while you're studying. So, maybe you get a year of that, and then what? So
Right.
people are either prepared to go underground and work under the table. Those are the natural sort of progressions from there, because, they're being sold a dead end from the outset.
Right.
I think, even though the schools are legit, they do have a program of study and they come with internships or co-ops. The long-term utility of those programs is zero. And somebody who sells those to students, I think, is a bad person.
Right. Absolutely. No, absolutely. After all, a lot of money is involved. I've seen students who actually sold their property in India and have come to Canada because they thought the grass is going to be greener here. Right. And the longer winters make them sad. So that's there. But then, yeah, it's a lot of rosy promise that they get. But then definitely Canada is a very good destination to come. Definitely, if you're working hard, you will have your way, build your career, build your future. You will have money if you're diligent and you're working towards your goals. But then they don't see the struggle that they're going to have. They're only told about the rosy pictures. But then once you come in and you have to struggle for a few years, that upsets you. And then you see, money is gone, my time is going, and this is happening and that is happening, which is upsetting for them. And in the process, a lot of other things also get distorted and upset.
Yeah, I guess if there's a silver lining, they say whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah.
I don't subscribe to that. It probably just makes you weaker. But anyway, the students who survive the changes, they're going to be in good position for PR. So, I mean, in terms of government policy, pushing more students into, masters or specialty programs, that just puts everything out of reach for other than some select few. But the prospects of those select few will be good.
Right. So that was about the express entry we spoke about. We started. There are provincial nominee programs. So what's your take on the provincial nominee programs, and how are they positioned in terms of the whole grand scheme of things, considering there's so much changes coming in the immigration system? How is the provinces keeping on with their end of the bargain with their nominee programs, and they are trying to fill in the gap in their own provinces?
Well, one of the changes was that the PNP allocations across the country were cut in half to only 55,000 for this year. Mm-hmm. So if you divide that by 13 provinces and territories, it doesn't leave that much for each. I think IRCC has bigger allocations for Ontario, BC, the more popular destinations, but already Manitoba and Newfoundland are campaigning to have an increase in their allotment, and they're coming up with programs like the Western Manitoba Initiative. One of these, the communities tell IRCC who they want, and then those candidates try to match the desires of the community. We have a similar program out here in BC, a Northern Pilot. I've looked through the list of, there aren't that many communities, at least not in BC, maybe a dozen communities signed up. And I have yet to match a client with any of those opportunities, but I'm sure they're working for someone. Mm-hmm. And so what's going to happen in the PNP is that competition will increase. Mm-hmm. Scores will remain high. And the provinces will, I think, mimic the express entry emphasis on specialist categories. And so people in the general category, just sort of skilled immigration or what have you, will be on the outside looking in. I'm most familiar with the BC case. I know your listeners are probably elsewhere, but in BC, for example, they have half a dozen specialist categories: healthcare, early child education, veterinary services, trades. But unlike express entry, to qualify for the trades, you have to have a red seal. And that's, quite difficult. Even challenging the exam for someone who has a lot of experience overseas is difficult, rightly so. I mean, the standards, the specifications, the building codes, everything is different. But to make that a requirement sets the bar really, really high. So very few people, skilled tradespeople, can access, the trades portion. And so where you have a handful of people drawn from the general pool, you probably have an equal number drawn from each of those subcategories, which will, presumably the province is efficiently targeting labor shortages. But again, to go back to the Whistler example, they've made the points for their entry-level semi-skilled category, which is servers, hospitality people, etc. Those scores are out of the reach of almost everyone. A normal profile is somebody who's paying a minimum wage and making a massive amount in tips, but tips don't count, so no points for tips. Many of them are high school graduates, 0 points. Many of them have only been in the service industry for a year or two, very few points. So they've put that category out of the reach of the people for whom it was intended. And it's not only Whistler, all throughout the Lower Mainland, restaurants, service outlets, retail, they're having real difficulty finding people. This isn't because, they want to hire cheap temporary foreign workers and ignore Canadians who want the jobs. Canadians don't want the jobs. It's a reality. I've been advertising these 5 pending LMIAs for 9 months. Nobody's applying. Is that not a sign of something? But the government, thinks macro and thinks popular public policy, and something's got to give in the system.
All right. So Dr. Joe,
these will be equally more difficult to qualify for. The short answer after that very long.
But I believe still Canada has its own charm. People are still applying, and I think sooner or later there will be more reforms. So coming to reforms, if you were to make reforms, what are the most important reforms do you think can be made right now, which will improve things in short term and long term?
I'd like to see, again, IRCC thinks that it can regulate the labor market by making specific changes, tinkering with who's desirable and express. I don't believe that. I mean, when I was in the Foreign Service, we went through both pendulum swings, but IRCC believes that. And so in terms of policy, I think they are going to continue to tinker with specialist categories or not. I don't think it's a good idea. I don't know what I haven't studied the specific data in terms of PR integration, but I have seen impressive statistics such as, 95% of PRs enter the labor market. The flip side of that is the apocryphal cab driving doctor, but you got to start somewhere. That was the traditional image of immigration in Canada. First generation comes in, they take whatever they can get. Still, life is better here than it was wherever. Don't know if that's true anymore. And they make better lives for their children. That's the myth of Canadian immigration. Now with global competition for talent, the really talented people can pick and choose. And if they, don't like this aspect of Canada, they can go to the States or Singapore, or UK, Australia. And so I don't know if the express entry approach of this is the general profile of the people who are most likely to hit the ground running. Like, I haven't seen the reporting data on that, but the employment statistics are encouraging and the education statistics are encouraging. So given my bias against micromanaging and what I perceive as the relative success of express entry, which it's a black box. We don't know how they choose the scores, the ITA scores, or decide how many they're going to draw. But the rest of it was fairly transparent. You knew if you had these characteristics, you'd have that many points, and your likelihood of success, based on the trend line for ITAs, was predictable to an extent. Now the minister has decided it's too much trouble to change regulations and stuff. I'll just issue ministerial instructions, like Trump signing executive orders on his first day to rename the Gulf of Mexico and other nonsense. I think it's dangerous in a way for the minister to be able to interfere too easily in the system, because political considerations become stronger than policy considerations. So what reforms I would like to, whatever the next election yields, we need a serious immigration minister, not a political immigration minister, who should task his department or her department with real policy analysis, project ahead 5 years, and defend those policy decisions. How is this, actually going to improve either the efficiency or the effectiveness or the attractiveness or, anything about the immigration system? We haven't sat down to really look at, what immigration is supposed to accomplish. It's become about targets and special interest groups and what have you.
Right. So you mean to say at the moment, it's not more towards understanding what economic impact it's going to have. So is it going to, impact the economy of Canada as a country? Or is it overburdening the system, or how it's...
Well, I mean, those are my problems with the current decisions. They're not data driven.
Right.
They're driven by popular sentiment. Do immigrants and international students, temporary workers, really significantly drive up housing prices? No one really knows. I mean, we couldn't possibly have analyzed those data this quickly.
Right.
And those are, this is serious business. People's lives are on the line, as you said. Somebody makes a choice to come from another country and reconfigure their families and their whole lives. This is serious business. It requires, serious thought on the part of policymakers, not reactive, sort of panic-driven policy decisions, which I think we're seeing now.
Right. So yeah, I think we discussed a lot around the policies and what the future of immigration looks like. And I think a lot of people already have a fair idea as to where they are headed and what they are supposed to do. So yeah, the conversation has been insightful. Thank you so much for giving us your time, Dr. Joe. It's been such a wonderful conversation.
So that was the end of conversation with Dr. Joe. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. His take on immigration policies and information is insightful. If you're looking forward to more such content on immigration, keep watching IMIPERS. So like, share, and subscribe to IMIPERS. Thank you.